Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 277. Hello and welcome to another episode of the djproject Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 277, My Own Private Idaho, directed by Gus Van Sant, 1991. This was a title that has been around with me for quite some time. As far as just the title's existence, not me seeing the film. It was only after this came out on DVD when I finally gave it a shot. But prior to that, I knew it as a minor joke in the Critic. Actually in the pilot episode, Jay Sherman was seen wearing a T-shirt that says "My Own Private Idaho," and then the other one was "My mother swears that I once owned a shirt that says "My Own Private Idaho." I don't remember that for the life of me, and I don't know where I would have gotten where I've obtained such a thing. So she swears by it, and she also believes that that's what scarred my life. I don't think that was it. I have my own issues, but that was not the cause of it. But anyways, so it's this title that's just been around, and then finally it came out on DVD in 2004, and I decided to check this out. And I knew a little bit more about it. That I knew that it was a fairly important American independent film of the 1990s. It's also part of the new queer cinema, and so I was kind of bracing myself, but I didn't really quite know what to expect, and but I kept an open mind, and because I was really interested, because I've heard this title, I was like, all right, I want to see this. It's it's a big deal, and I was fairly familiar with the American independent scene of the 90s in little bits. I can't claim to have seen everything, but I definitely knew who Jim Jarmusch was. I definitely know who Todd Solondz was, and I even knew who Gus Van Sant was. And so I was just really curious about this. And then I got it. And actually, it's pretty good. Pretty much the only way to really describe the feel of the film, and including its little components, is the best way to describe this is that it feels like a stew, like a beef stew, where each little component is very clear and very distinct. But you would think that with so many elements it would just come off as this big clusterfuck, but it really doesn't. It holds together in a very strange, charming way. The big through line, and this is ultimately how I see the film, by the way, is it's about really it's about these two street hustlers that work primarily in Portland, and one of them, Mike, played by River Phoenix, and this was pretty much the role that was the, I guess you could call it the signature role, or the signature performance of his career, and the one that really made him a much bigger name than, say, Stand By Me. But anyways, it's I kind of see it more as his story. It's also the other story, Scott, played by Keanu Reeves, and yes, he actually does a pretty good job in this one. So this is very early in his career too. So and this is where it all kind of works. But really, I kind of see it more as Mike's story, and Mike is again, he works as a street hustler. He's gay. I'll get into that a little bit later. And his big thing was that he also suffers from narcolepsy, and he also has um, this this drive to find out where his mother is, and he has a constant search for home, both in the physical sense, but more importantly in the emotional sense. And he thinks that he's going to achieve that if he finally finds his mother. So it takes him to Idaho and finds out a little bit more. It even takes him to Rome, finds out a little bit more, but it all ends up being kind of disappointing. And in the end, it actually the other things that the other thing that happens is that he has this relationship with Scott, and he feels that it goes beyond just a mere friendship or just being a fellow colleague, as being a fellow hustler colleague. That there's something deep and emotional and total, which includes a physical relationship. But that all gets thwarted with Rome. Also in Portland, Scott is is part of a gang of fellow ruffians led by Bob, and this is the other component of the probably the other famous component of My Own Private Idaho, is that this is an alt indie take on the Henriad. Bob is supposed to be Falstaff, and Scott is therefore Harry. And yes, certain bits of Henry IV, both parts, and a little bit of Henry V is present in this thing. So you have all these different things, and you think. And by the way, whenever Mike has an narcoleptic episode, it goes into these time lapse shots and these sort of shots that seemingly have nothing to do with the surroundings, but it's just more of his mind state at that time, sort of his thoughts and his aspirations, just all there. And you think with all of that, it's just going to be a total mess. And I would say, and there are some people who do consider it a total mess because of all these different elements. But I would say that this is where it actually works. And I think what makes it work is that it all it centers on these two characters, and particularly on Mike. I feel that this is more of Mike's story than it is Scott's, although Scott is a big player in this. In fact, the way that it was originally conceived, Van Sant wanted to do a hustler, or a piece about the street hustling in Portland, and then eventually it kind of the script itself was kind of a weird mutation, and there's lots have been written about it, so you can find out. But basically, it's sort of an amalgamation of different stuff, and the big ones being this this street hustler adaptation of the Henriad, and this search for one's mother, or the search for home. So it's a very trippy road trip, as it were. Also, something that just occurred to me. There are a few shots that remind. There's a lot about it that reminds me a lot of Godard, and which is funny because in the new queer cinema camp, the one director that is the most often compared to Godard would be Greg Araki. But this film, I feel, is certainly Godardian, and I think Godardian in the good sense, not in the fuck off way that Araki seems to is sometimes viewed as. Take the Doom Generation, for instance. But there's also a few shots that, interestingly enough, remind me of Pasolini, and I think one of them is that they do go to Rome, and just seeing the street hustle, the Roman equivalent of street hustling, does kind of remind me a bit of Pasolini. But in other respects, just the melodrama, the odes to a cultural past. For, I mean, in Pasolini's case, it was more art, more paintings, and for Van Sant, it was more cinema homages. In fact, the part of the reason why he wanted to use elements of the Henriade was because he had seen Orson Welles' Chimes at Midnight, and that's when he started to kind of see the Henriade as very much a street story, and it makes sense given Harry, and particularly in Henry the Fourth, parts 1 and 2. It's Harry is not interested in being the respectful ruler and decides to hang around with ruffians and particularly with Falstaff. And then by the time we get to Henry V, he's completely different from that. He's not the same. He's not the same character, or not the same guy. And that change aspect does play out, and I think in a very interesting way, because while there's definitely lots of odes to Shakespeare, and there's a few moments where they get into some of the Shakespearean language, it's not overt. It's not like with, say, what would come out 3 years afterwards, William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, directed by Baz Luhrmann, where they do full-on Elizabethan dialogue. But there's a lot of it is paraphrases. But you definitely, if you know the plays, you can definitely pick up the Shakespeare elements, and it really is just it's just a modern adaptation of it. It's just set in Portland and done in this sort of free-form way. So yeah, so it reminds me a lot of Godard, just in terms of its construction. There's not a lot of reflexivity. It's nothing like that, or you feel the artifice, but certainly the I think some of the playfulness and the experimentation of structure, but all done to show an emotional core. Whereas Godard would experiment just to kind of test the artifice and kind of play with the structure a bit. But for Van Sant, it's more about the emotions, and then also with Pasolini. And then I guess the final thing I want to say, I knew I was going to get into this, is that I really don't like calling this a gay film. And because to call it that, whether you like the film or you don't, and but calling it a gay film either because you like the film or you think that, hey, this is it has a positive gay character, or if you don't like the film because it showcases it, I think it limits the film in a lot of respects. I think when you call a certain film with a certain descriptor, it can limit the appeal. And part of what makes a really great film is one that, while it could work within certain parameters, it could be informed by a certain set of experiences or a certain set of beliefs, it doesn't necessarily have to remain in that. It's actually, in a way, it's similar to the assumption that you have to be an ardent Catholic to like the films of Bresson, and I would say that you don't have to be gay in order to like My Own Private Idaho, because again, I think what really resonates, and I think what can appeal to anybody is the emotional core, and particularly with Mike. And actually, the funny thing is that for Van Sant, he didn't intend it to be so much about being gay. In fact, when it comes to Mike's sexuality, he wanted it to be very ambiguous. There was much talk about there's a campfire scene. It's this heart-to-heart talk between Mike and Scott. And the way it was originally written, it was 3 pages and probably just kind of straightforward and just a kind of a campfire scene. But it was actually River Phoenix who rewrote that scene, and it turned into this 8-page thing where he confesses his love Scott, and it makes it very clear that he's gay. So, if anything, it's actually River Phoenix that took it to the levels that he did. Not so much Van Sant. I mean, he went with it. I mean, it's there. So, I mean, ultimately, it was final approval. But from a writing standpoint, he didn't, intend any of those overtones. I think for him, it was just more like he had these ideas and he wanted to make it happen, and he had an opportunity to make it happen, which is interesting because even at that time, it was unsure whether it would work or not. But because he had made Drugstore Cowboy, and it was a success, it gave him a certain latitude. But also the other thing is that he lowered his expectations as far as budget. In fact, he imagined it to be a low budget affair where it would just all be done in Portland. It would all be done, and actually you would use actual street hustlers to perform everything. But that changed when he showed the script to both Keanu Reeves and River Phoenix. Both stars in their own rights, and thus making it a very attractive project. And then it turned into a film where they were able to work in a $2.5 million budget, and they were able to take in 6, which is not too shabby. I mean, obviously it's not the hundreds of millions, but considering that they made their money back 3 times over is pretty good, and especially given the kind of the offbeat nature of the film and the focus of this particular group in Portland. It's and you would think that this wouldn't work, but it managed to work. And I think what made it work is ultimately, in spite of the specificity of the geography. And yes, Idaho is involved in this. I mentioned a lot about Portland, but yes, Idaho is there. Like I said, it's a tripped-out road trip. It's kind of what this is. There is an emotional core to it that is that hopefully anybody can appreciate and can understand something of it. So I would say that if you want to know what it's a great example of independent cinema, and yes, it is part of the nuclear cinema camp, but really I think it's a worthwhile film. Certainly it's worth seeing once. And there's a lot in it, and again, I think of it like a stew. All the elements, they're very distinct, but they're all there, and they all work together fairly well. So, whereas it could have easily not have worked. So, but yeah, and that's My Own Private Idaho. And until next time, take care.